Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream. For those of you who this is your first time, I'm Andrew Murphy. I'm the founder of Tech Leaders Launchpad, and this is a live stream that I get together the people that I learn from in the industry, the people that help me become better. I spend a lot of time in technology leadership learning things the hard way, and I do everything I do now to make sure that you don't have to do it the hard way as well. And Tech Leaders Launchpad live stream is one of the ways I do that. Today, I've got with me Phil Johnson, who we're going to be talking on the topic of agency versus product versus consultancy. Phil and I used to work together at Linktree, which is how we know each other. But Phil, do you want to kind of give people a little bit of a background introduction to you? Tell us, where you came from and why this particular topic is something that you think people will benefit from, and why you for this particular topic.
Sure. So yeah, as Andrew said, I worked with him over at Linktree. I'm currently a tech lead at Prezzee. I've been there just over a year now. I think a year and about a week even. But prior to that, I was a lead engineer at Linktree. But going back to the beginning, I started out in agency space. Actually, I actually started as a designer for a publisher when I was studying at uni. So I got a chance to work on, actual physical media, which is where I got my start. And it was there that I started doing a lot more development and engineering. I built a conference management platform as a single engineer, still in uni. So it was absolutely shocking code. Incredibly insecure. I'd never build it that way again. But it gave me a chance to sort of get into that sort of space. And then I finished up there, moved into agency. So I worked for an agency in Brisbane for about 4 years, where I did everything from development to filmmaking. So I was basically I studied film at university. And then once I finished up there, I moved to Melbourne, where I worked for Bolster, who was a creative agency in there that they did digital marketing. They worked with the event space, festivals, tours, all that sort of stuff. And they were also the founders of Linktree. So they ended up building Linktree, which became what it is today, and which is how we met. And so finally, when I decided to make the leap from agency, I moved into Linktree and worked on that. So for me, I've got sort of like a really solid history of like agency life, but also seeing sort of how products get built, and then they become sort of their own space, which is usually how a lot of the product companies I think start. But yeah, that's pretty much a bit about me.
Cool. Yeah, I didn't know that bit of the history about the beginning coming, and building something from scratch. And I had a very similar experience. My in the UK, we often do what are called sandwich university courses, where you will work you'll go to uni for a couple of years, and then you'll work for a year as an industrial placement, and then you'll come back to uni to finish your degree off. And I did that. And during my sandwich year, I worked for a fire and fireplace manufacturer in Huddersfield in England, and I was the sole software developer there. And I built all of their business operation software from scratch. So order management, purchase management, stock management, all of that kind of stuff. And being the fresh-faced guy who knew a lot about software development but didn't know a lot about the commercial world, I think back on some of the stuff I did then, and it's shocking. I built my own ORM, concatenating SQL strings together. Yeah, I didn't know about SQL injection. It wasn't
Yeah.
something that you're taught at uni, and I think it's an amazing experience to have done that. But I
Mm.
think it's also something we shouldn't do as an
Oh
industry.
yeah. Well, I mean, for me, I didn't do it as part of uni. Like there was a section,
Mm.
like there was like a 6 month thing where you did get to go out and like um, work with a, a real world project if you wanted to. But this was just I just thought I'm going to apply for jobs while I'm studying, because that way I got my foot in the door. I got a chance to do stuff. But yeah, same sort
Yeah.
of deal. built stuff that I probably shouldn't have, in ways that you shouldn't have. I like, this is back in the day where people were like, yeah, we can store passwords as plain text in the database. That's not a problem, is it?
Yeah, I should do a live stream at some point of like, mistakes and fuck ups and bad
Oh
decisions,
yeah.
because I think there's so many that I can call back from my history of mistakes that I made, many many years ago that still haunt me to this day. And I think,
Mm.
it's we're in an industry where it's so easy to make mistakes, and the impact of those mistakes are so big that, you've kind of got to talk about it enough. It's definitely something. Liz, yeah, coding catastrophes. That's a great name for the live stream. Maybe that's what we should call it. I love that. That's awesome.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah. Oh,
that's a good point,
we could talk
actually.
about CrowdStrike on that one.
Yeah, definitely. That's a good point. If you, I've got a few planned points of discussion for Phil and I. We're going to talk about some stuff, but as always with these live streams, my goal with them is to make them applicable straight away. I don't want you to kind of listen to us for 40, 50 minutes and go, oh, well, that was kind of interesting, but I don't really know how I can apply it to my life. So if you've got a question, if you've got something you want to ask us, please do ask that. I want to make sure that we can give you contextualized, real examples of what's going on. And if you want to know our experiences, both of us have worked both in agency and product, and I've worked in consultancy before as well. And we can talk about the difference between all of those. Please ask questions. We will try and get to as many as we possibly can. If you've got to drop off early, don't worry. This is being recorded on both LinkedIn and YouTube, wherever you're watching this. If you're watching this on LinkedIn, I suggest you watch it on YouTube. It's a better user experience for you, better notifications, etc., etc., etc. But if you want to watch it on LinkedIn, that is fine too. Cool. All right, let's kick off with, I guess, we're talking about products versus agency, and also I kind of dropped in this term consultancy there as well. Before we go any further, maybe it's worth just, what do we mean by those words? Like, why? What is the difference between them? In your mind, Phil, what's the difference between product versus agency? And if you've got an opinion on where consultancy fits in that as well, maybe tell us that, and then afterwards I'll kind of give my thoughts on where I agree and disagree with your opinion, because I don't think there's an industry definition of what this stuff means.
Yeah. I mean, to me, agency is usually client-led. So it's a case where you know you have your team, you've got your designers, you've got your, maybe it's just a tech house, you've only got developers, but it's really sort of like you work on projects that are client-led, so clients will, employ you to do whatever it is that they need to get done. Um, which is kind of complete opposite for product. Product is usually internal led, so it's a product that you've came up with. It's something that is continuously being developed internally, and you gotta get to set the bounds of, I guess, what happens next, which is a really bizarre thing to switch to once you've been working in agency. Like, that's one of the areas that is both good and bad, about it. Same thing with agencies. Working for clients can be really good because you get an interesting range of work, but also you get some really ridiculous requests sometimes. You think, oh, this is never gonna work. This is a terrible idea, and you spend more time trying to explain to them sort of why it's not great. As for consultancy, I haven't done much consultancy before. It's usually a space between the two, in my opinion. So a consultant, usually you're a subject matter expert. You get to go into, perhaps a product space and basically, lend your skills, knowledge, expertise on that sort of stuff, and you get to then sort of like just drop it when you feel like you don't want to work on it. Like, if you have a client that doesn't listen to you, you can easily phase out, and that's not a problem. You can kind of do that with agency, but like, you get sort of a negative connotation if you do that too frequently. But yeah, that's kind of how I see it. But I mean, tell me what you think.
I don't think I disagree with anything you said. I think that's very close to the way I would describe it. I think I was thinking of like a concise way to express this, and the best way I found is by saying if you get the benefits from the software that you're building, you're probably a product company. If you don't get the benefits from that software, but you're paid to work on it, you're probably an agency or a consultancy. And like that's probably the the way that I like to think about it. Like if you're building it and somebody buys the software and you get the money from buying that software, you're probably the product company of that software. Whereas if you get paid, say like an hourly rate or fixed price rate to build that, then you're probably an agency or consultancy. As for the difference between those two, I think this is where there's a gray area between agency and consultancy. And my mental model is that if the client is engaging a team to work on it, it's probably an agency. If the client is engaging an individual or a number of individuals, it's probably a consultancy as opposed to an agency. And that's just kind of the way that I think about it. Do you agree or disagree with any of those statements?
Yeah, no, I think that that probably nails it as well. And it's similar to what I was saying, like client led, so external impact versus internal impact. So who sets the
Yeah,
rules? Do you set the rules, or does someone else set the rules? But I mean, I suppose then you get to the space of like user led product, and that gets a little bit blurry. But
yeah,
yes,
it
I think
does.
I think that's where the payment model makes more sense.
Yeah, 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 and I think there's interesting discussion. So I used to be director of engineering and effectively run the software development side of agencies, and we used to have really interesting discussions as a leadership team of the agency around our role of I guess the business side of the client's product and how who do we represent? Whose interests are we advocating for? Are we advocating for the interests of the users of the software or the person who's paying our bill? And it's really interesting dynamics there of if we've got research that says the client shouldn't do the thing they're paying us money to do, what should we do as an agency? And
Mm.
it's fascinating discussions there. There's no clear cut answer to questions like that.
Yeah, yeah. Because I was head of web development when I was at Bolster and had same sort of challenges. It's like we've got clients that are asking you to do this, and I'm like, well, one, they don't have the budget, or two, they just, it's just a ridiculous thing, and it's going to cause pain to the people working on it. So it was at those points that I was like, well, maybe this is an approach that we take on. It's not about the money. It's like, who is this a good idea or not? If it's not, even if they're going to pay, I'll be like, well, this probably isn't for us. Maybe you can find some
Yeah,
other agency to do that sort of work. And I've got no problems pushing back when it was those sorts of projects. And
yeah,
yeah, especially if it was like going to cause problems internally of like, let's build something that we just have no passion for, because it doesn't build a good product either.
no, no. And the typical one for me was, we want to build the Amazon of dog food. To which my response was, "Cool. Do you have Amazon's budget then?"
Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Or the
well,
same time that Amazon took.
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Cool. All right. So I think we've kind of got to a consensus on that. If you've got a differing opinion, please feel free to you know give it and we can discuss it. Liz has got a comment here. Levels of stakeholder management is deeply led when you're in an agency versus consultancy. Yeah, that's a great point, because if you're in a consultancy as well and you've got individuals that are kind of at various levels of the organization, it's definitely a trickier concept. There's a lot more going on and a lot more complexity than if you're just kind of got a team working on something. But let's think about this from the point of view of let's say I'm somebody who's a couple of years into my career. I'm thinking about what should I do. There's a lot of aspects of whether you should work. You as a concept individual should work in an agency or a product company or a consultancy. And a lot of that comes down to what's important to you. There's a bunch of different dimensions and facets. So let's talk about some of those then. Like Phil, when you're thinking of getting a job and looking and interviewing and finding a job, what things are important to you when you're doing that?
Yeah, I so thinking about this one, I think it also depends on where you're at in your career. Because for me, what I was happy with sort of 5 years ago is very different to sort of the place that I'm in now. For when I want to pick sort of like somewhere new to work at, I pick places that one, I think it's important that you believe in, that you're going to be passionate about, and that you're interested in. And I think that that's sort of like the biggest impact is like, because if you've got no interest in it, if you don't think you're going to be challenged, then I don't think that's sort of the space for you. So, and I think that applies obviously across both agency and product. In terms of impact, different people have got different opinions on that. Like for some people, they want to have like sort of a positive global impact, so they'll focus on companies that are so that green space, or they're trying to adhere to a set of clear morals. Other people, their happiness is just, I want to get paid a lot, and so therefore they'll focus on places that they're quite happy just to get the biggest amount of money possible. And I don't think that that's necessarily a problem. It means that you've got a lot more other flexibilities. But to me, it really comes down to like, am I going to enjoy the work that I'm doing? Am I going to get a challenge out of it? And do I believe in that space and what they're trying to do? And that to me is what drives my happiness and content. But it's then I think there's other factors, like if you're going to work for an agency or a scale up startup, like, are you prepared to work the hours that you're expected to work? When I was younger, more than happy to go through and say, yeah, I'm happy to work like 10-15 hour days if I'm going to get that enjoyment out of it. And it's much easier to do that when you don't have other external factors like a family to support and maintain. But yeah, more than happy to do that when I was younger. I wouldn't probably look at a place that does that sort of stuff these days, just as I've matured, I think.
Yeah, 15 years ago, I worked at a SaaS product startup, when the terms SaaS product and startup didn't exist. And it was. I often reflect on that as the happiest I was in my career. I was, had. I spent a lot of time in that company, like you were saying. I was working 10, 12-hour days. I was working a lot, but I was loving it. And I had equity stake in the company, so I was literally invested in the success of it. And I was amazingly happy there. But would I be able to do that now with, the fact that I'm older and got more commitments? And, my wife wouldn't be happy if I worked 12-hour days now. And, my son wouldn't be happy if I worked 12-hour days. I already feel guilty about, the time that I don't spend with him. And that would just massively increase that. So I think you're absolutely right that the life stage you're in hugely impacts the what's important to you, and your personal circumstances with respect to all of that stuff we've talked about can change which of these things you focus on. And as you were talking, it made me think about, yeah, there's probably different focuses on this depending on where you are in your career as well. Thinking and reflecting on, say, a junior engineer versus a senior versus a manager, I think there's also different upsides and downsides, product versus agency there. Like, I think, from what I've reflected on, it's really hard for a junior engineer to get a lot of support in a product in a agency place, because there's such a very direct connection between the hours that you work and the income that you generate for your company. It makes it really hard for agencies to make the decision on not having juniors on projects and taking seniors off projects to support them. And so I think there's a forcing function there, which means that juniors tend to get better support in product versus agency. Do you agree with that? Disagree with that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree, that's the case. Like in a product space, you're gonna have a lot of seasoned engineers, you're gonna have a lot of seasoned developers, and you can certainly develop your skills, but it depends on the agency that you're in as well. Like for me, I was that junior in a space where there was maybe one other engineer around me. Um, but because of the way in which I work and the things that I get a challenge out of, I got a chance to just learn it, and basically I did it all myself. So I got a chance to basically go out. I did courses. I read documentation, all sort of stuff. And I think that that sort of space is also incredibly beneficial because you figure out how to be a self starter as opposed to going, oh, I can just ask my senior engineer. Like I've worked with people and I've interviewed people in the past who's like, look, when you've got this problem, what are you going to do about it? Oh, I'll just escalate it to my lead. Whereas when you're in an agency and you're sort of like it's a startup agency, when you've got a problem, you don't have anyone to escalate it to. You have to figure it out yourself. And I think that that type of environment can create a really great engineer. I mean, you're going to develop bad practices, that's fine, but you're going to know how to solve any problem that comes your way because you had to see it all. Whereas in a product space, it's like, oh, well, I'll escalate that to the principals, or I'll escalate that to DevOps, or I'll escalate that to a stakeholder who can manage those expectations. Whereas if you're the one who has to deal with all of it, you're going to learn so much faster. And I think that you can get a good range of experience in agency, but you're going to develop those bad practices. And if you are the sort of person who would like to be able to benefit from someone around you, um, agency is not necessarily the space for you in that sort of sense. 100% agree that you're going to get like really great seasoned engineers giving you advice as a junior in a product space, and you'll learn how to do things the right way, but you're not going to learn the wrong way of doing things, which can also give you a good education out of it too.
Yeah, I wonder if there's an angle of breadth versus depth there, and in an agency because you're jumping between projects and you're kind of you're not working on something for more than a few months at the absolute most. You probably over say a 12-month or 24-month period, you probably get a lot more exposure to different technologies, different techniques, different business models, different ways of building software at an agency than you would at a product company. But you probably also don't get as much experience in depth and scale of software as well. Like, I wonder if that's a trade-off. Have you experienced that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, that's one of the things that I really enjoyed about the agency life, though. I mean, I studied multimedia because I wanted that breadth of experience. So when I studied, I got to do film, I did sound design, I did animation, um, you know, graphic design, as well as engineering. So I got a chance to do all this stuff, and that's what I really enjoyed. So for me, going into that agency space, I was like, great. One week I get to work on a website. The next week I get to build something completely different. So I got to build things like, you know, an interface like we're using right now. So we had a live chat system with a live stream going on. You could ask questions. So I got a chance to sort of build that. I learned about Node when it was emerging, WebSockets, but also then I learned about sort of how you would just build sort of a standard website and all the front end and back end engineers. But what I didn't learn about in agencies were things like microservices and micro front ends, and being able to drill down that sort of front end developer route, which we see these days. And you're not going to get exposure to the depth of the same sort of architectures, because agencies, you don't tend to have that sort of space. But like, if you're starting out and you don't know where you want to specialize, agencies is a really good place to be able to get that breadth before you start to go down that focus route of like, cool, I really enjoyed like front end engineering, or I really enjoyed that project where I did, you know, huge scale architecture of a API service. Like I've got to build API services, which I haven't sort of done from scratch in a long time. So it's like that breadth I think is good, but certainly you don't get the depth in most cases. As you scale up to like large agencies, I'm sure you do, but like for me, it was like that startup culture of like, let's just say yes to everything, and it's just a different project every month. And it was, I mean, it's great, but yeah, it depends if that's the sort of space that you enjoy.
Yeah, and I think that is really a personal choice. I think there's upsides and downsides we can discuss for junior engineers, but I think beyond junior, I think it becomes personal preference more than anything. I did 3 tours of duty in agencies, and after my last one, I kind of vowed never to go back. Not because I have anything against them. I spent the better part of a decade, probably more than a decade, in agency and consultancy life, and I must have done that for a reason. But just because I'd got to the point where I was really looking for a longer term investment in something. Like I wanted to make decisions that had a 1 year, 2 year payoff. I wanted to be able to invest in a code base and a teams and systems and processes and things that were suboptimal for the next 3 to 4 months, but super optimal for the next 12 to 24 months. And that kind of stuff you tend to not find in agency. You sometimes do find it in consultancy, and I think this is potentially one of the useful differences. Consultancy is often you as an individual are parachuted into an existing team, or an existing project, and those projects can be long running projects. It's just you're maybe not there from the inception of them, and I think you can get some sense of that long term investment in a consultancy versus an agency sometimes. Maybe that's a trade off to think about. The downside of that is you're often not there for the inception, and you're often not there for the end of the project. But you might be on the project for a year or two. It's a 5 year project. Yeah. Well, have you done anything in the, I guess, what I'm calling the consultancy space, or has it just been product and agency for you?
Yeah, for me, it's mainly been product and agency. Like I've looked at consultancy. I feel like consultancy, like you've certainly got consultancy firms, but that would be a good space if you were like an individual and wanted to sort of work on that sort of stuff. Because that's, I mean, you can go like a freelance route, but a freelance consultancy is you can do that a lot easier once you've got a good experience across both agency and product if you really wanted to. But yeah, it depends on if you want to go through your own route,
Mm.
self
Yeah.
self-led.
I guess like that's a useful mental model as well. Is often the difference between an agency and a consultancy is, with an agency, you're buying the agency as a client, whereas as a consultancy, you're buying an individual. Like, you're buying them and their skill set and their experience. And that gives you opportunities, because they're obviously, they respect you, they want you, they want your experience, so you might have more influence as a consultant coming into something, but you also don't have the backing of a whole team to kind of help you with that. So I guess there's upsides and downsides there as well. I've never been a consultant. I've managed consultants, but I've never done it myself in that way.
Mhm. No, absolutely, and I think that's true. The downside of getting a consultant in as well is that, like, if you don't like them, or for their limited knowledge, if they don't have that sort of stuff, and then it's gone. Like yeah, great. Well, I'll just find a different consultant. So absolutely agree. Like having an agency where you've got cool, we've got a dedicated back end, front end marketer, all that sort of stuff. You can get that sort of space in an agency, which you don't get in consultants. But I see more consultancy going into product space. Like consultants will
Yeah.
they'll pair with products, which is where I was saying earlier, like I think that consultancy is kind of that blur between an agency and a product, because you do tend to get like more consultancies, usually because products can afford it, whereas individual clients can't.
Yeah, I think there's also like you made a point of back end there, and that made me think. I think if with this dynamic we're talking about, if you're working for an agency or a product company, it's probably easier for you to shift around the role that you do within that company. We had somebody at Linktree who wanted to. She was a senior engineer and wanted to explore becoming a product manager effectively. And we were able to position the teams such that we could give her some of those responsibilities and enabled her to explore what that meant, what actually practice being a product manager and have some of those responsibilities and activities that I think would be almost impossible at a consultancy because they're hiring you to fit into a particular jigsaw piece hole.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And like, I mean, Prezzee does the same sort of stuff. It's like they've got a program. It's like, cool. If you want to try something different, you can. And I think the advantage of product spaces is that you can do that a lot more controlled. Whereas in an agency, it's like you kind of get thrust into some things, even if you don't necessarily
Mm,
want it. Like, it's like if there's a need for the business, then you're sort of one of the few people there, you get to fill that need. So I think that that's the advantage, that you have a lot more control in a product space where you go, great, I want to focus on just this one thing for now, and you've got the ability to do that. Whereas in agencies, it's like, cool, basically you're the full stack now. You get to do back end and front end
yeah,
because that's just the needs that we have. And a lot of the times you can't necessarily justify hiring a specific role for a short-lived project. So it's like, cool, you just get to do it, which again, some people enjoy it, some people don't.
yeah. When I was a agency -2, I would never hire front end and back end devs. I would only ever hire full stack devs. And you could be 70-30 one way or the other. Sure, no dev is going to be exactly 50-50 one way or another. We're all going to have preferences and desires and experiences. But I set the expectation up front that you're going to be expected to do both. And you might every team and every project was self-aligning in the sense of I didn't go when I was creating the teams for a project. I wouldn't go, okay, well, Jessica's the back end and Jennifer's the front end. I would go between these two engineers, we have back end and front end covered. It's up to them on the project to work out exactly what they're going to do. But sometimes that meant somebody was going to be doing something they didn't prefer to do, and unfortunately, that is just the rubs of agency life. I had a mobile engineer, and we didn't have any mobile projects for 6 months. And it was a case of, okay, sorry, you're gonna have to struggle your way through some web dev.
Yeah.
you know, I have web dev work, I don't have mobile dev work, and it's a case of, do you want to twiddle your thumbs and do whatever, or do you want to do some web dev? And those are the two options. I just don't have mobile dev work for you. Sorry. Whereas I think with products, you're much more able to take advantage of the talent you've got and choose the projects and kind of create the work that fits the best use of the talent you've got in your team. Whereas with agency, you're more driven by the demands and the needs of the market and what clients want.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's interesting that you talk about sort of mobile dev in an agency space, because um, we never had that opportunity in the agencies that I worked at. We never had sort of like a dedicated mobile developer, but it was also like when we did start doing some mobile dev, so we contracted a mobile dev, and then like when we were doing some other projects in the early days, that was at the time where people were like, "Oh, we can use web programming languages to compile down to mobile." So we did it the reverse. It was like, cool, we're web developers, but we need to build a mobile app, so let's use JavaScript to do that. And I think that's the advantage of like some of the frameworks that are coming out for that sort of space. But yeah, it's interesting that you had like a dedicated mobile dev that didn't merge the other way. But like hopefully these days with like Kotlin and React Native and lots of stuff, you can just
Yeah.
bounce between any of those if you use the right frameworks.
Yeah, definitely. And that was, we definitely had a huge preference to build out a React Native
Mm.
mobile suite for that reason. It just enabled the devs to move more easily between the stuff. We've got a question from Uj here. As a consultant, you work on a variety of different projects in different business contexts. What challenges can you face if you decide to go back to a product company on a specific domain? So I guess this is the question of, you've gone from a place where it's breadth, breadth, breadth first. It's too early in the morning to say that word. Breadth first, and you're moving to a product company where depth is more important. What are the internal challenges that you can kind of struggle with? Have you got any thoughts on that, Phil?
Yeah, and I mean, I mean, for me, going from agency into product, like I was very hesitant about moving into product space. Um, because I really enjoyed that breadth. So for me, it was this case of like going from something where you like I enjoyed the fact that I got to start something new every couple of months. It was a little bit frustrating that you couldn't develop it up further, or like the client didn't have the budget and stuff. So moving to the product space, it was like, cool, I now get to focus on that. So it can be a challenge if you like to be able to bounce around stuff, and then moving back into a specific domain, it's like, well, I don't have the opportunity to bounce. So you do need to change your mindset on that. It's like, well, I'm not going to be bouncing around. I'm not going to be able to start something new. I'm going to be focusing on improving what we've already got. It's that continuous improvement development. It's like, great, let's just figure out the ways in which we can just make incremental changes over a long period of time. And the challenge is changing that mindset, in my opinion, of like, you're not bouncing. Let's just, you're just going to focus and get one thing done, and really focus on that area. And that's probably the biggest challenge that I had when I switched into product. But that was something that I was aware of, that's going to be the case. And so you just have to accept that, like, and I think as you get into a bigger and bigger product, that becomes harder and harder, because you've got all these processes in places. Like I was talking to an engineer the other day, going, right, they've gone into a huge product space now. And it's like, it takes 3 months to add a button. It's like, well,
Yeah.
that's the the challenges of it. So you kind of need to accept, well, this is what I'm moving into, and then also look for the benefits of what that means too.
Yeah, that's exactly the point that I was going to mention. Is we're kind of lumping all product companies in one bucket here, but there is a huge difference between a scrappy startup of 5 people and an established scale up of 500 people. Like, there is a big difference between those, and one of them is definitely speed of delivery, and the larger you are as a company, the tends to be the slower things get delivered to production, and that can be one of the big culture shocks of moving into that kind of world. Is you go from this place, say, where you're an agency where you're delivering things on a daily or weekly basis. You're kind of building things pretty quick, or at the very least, you're spending 2, 3, 4 months building something, and you're launching an entire product or an entire website after sort of 2 or 3 months. And then you go to a product company, established product company, and you're delivering, like you say, a button. And the whole pipeline of defining what you need to build, how you're going to build it, what that looks like, that whole thing just takes so much longer. Part of the reason is, often when clients come to you, they've already got an idea of what they want to build. And yes, there's upsides and downsides with that. And there's a lot of things we can talk about with, sometimes the client wants the wrong thing, and how do you do with that, yada, yada, yada. But there is already a lot of thought process the client has kind of gone through in deciding what to build and why, and exactly what it's going to look like. And so you've kind of got a jump start when you're at an agency or a consultancy, that with a product company, you're kind of involved and exposed to that whole process, especially if you're a senior, a lead, or above. You're seeing that whole pipeline of work definition, which you didn't see before. And so you can get frustrated that an idea that was talked about in quarter one doesn't get started to be developed until quarter 3 and doesn't actually end up in production until quarter 1 the following year. That can be a big source of frustration. Yeah, this will be recorded. So if you're watching this on YouTube, it'll be recorded and put on the YouTube channel. Good opportunity for me to mention people to subscribe to the channel to get notified about that kind of stuff. But yeah, wherever you're watching this, YouTube, LinkedIn, or Twitch, it is recorded and posted. It's also on my website if you want to go to techleaderslaunchpad.com. All of the past live streams and YouTube videos and events and everything are on there as well. Have we, is there any other areas? I guess maybe one thing is surprises. Is there something that surprised you about moving from agency to product? Was there something that you didn't expect, but kind of, came up and surprised you in that transition?
To be honest, no. Not really. I mean, I had a fairly good understanding of what it was going to be like working in product space. There were things that I think were really great about making that transition, and it's some of the stuff that we've talked about before. Having a team around you makes a huge difference to you as a developer. So having a 20, 30, 40 engineers to be able to bounce ideas off and to work with. It was those sorts of things that it wasn't so much a surprise. It was really great to be able to have that when I did make that sort of switch. It was like, oh, this is good. Like people talk about in products, oh, look, it's really stressful, it's busy and all sort of stuff. But like it's also very relaxing when you can go, hey, I've got a problem. I don't have to fix it myself. I can ask someone for support. And that was sort of like the big thing, I think, for me when you could do that. And also being able to have that time to develop up something that you wanted to perfect. You could kind of, I mean, you can never really perfect it, but you can spend the time and invest in it and go, cool, I've been wanting to do this for the last sort of like 5 years. This would have made my life easier. Like, let's build a library for UI components. Agencies, you don't have the time to be able to do that. You don't have the budgets to be able to do that, even though that that it'll make things better. You just can't. And then moving into a product space, like, great, I can actually build this library. I can build an SDK. I can build these sorts of things. And being able to do that it feels a lot more freeing. And that's where you get to like hone in those sorts of skills. So it wasn't so much that it was a surprise. It was just the feeling once you got to do that was just good. Like, yeah, I still don't align with people like, oh, we work endless hours and it's stressful and all sorts of stuff. I was like, well, no, it's still like 9 to 5, 5:30, and like you get to clock off and all sorts of stuff. Whereas agencies, you'd be you work until it's done.
Yeah. I think I was quite lucky. I worked at an agency called Two Balls, and one of the things we were quite strong on was building those, I guess, things that made it quicker and easier to build products, like the templates, the bootstraps, the UI libraries, the backend templates, like this kind of stuff. There's interesting dynamics with agencies, which is the quicker you make building software, the less you charge the client for building it. And those kinds of dynamics often have interesting forcing functions. And this is why, as much as fixed price projects have a load of downsides associated with them, one of the upsides is you can focus on this idea of, okay, well, let's optimize our ways of working, which you don't necessarily have a forcing function for in an agency, because if you're just doing pure time and materials charging, then you're kind of incentivized for things to be slower than they should be. So like that's interesting dynamics there, and I think that's a good segue for the thing that was most surprising about me coming back into products. So my experience product prior to my experience at agency, I was literally invested in them. Like, I was an equity holder in the product companies I worked at previously. Whereas at Linktree, obviously ESOP and whatever, but I wasn't, I wasn't a significant equity holder. And there was interesting dynamics there for me around like the financial way of thinking about the business, with agency life and consultancy life, because there is this very direct connection between the work that somebody does and the income that they generate. There's all of these thoughts around making best advantage of somebody, and like, what is the best way to utilize this person, because you if they're not working, they're not generating income. And that disconnection between the hours that somebody works and the income that they generate at a product company was really surprising to me. Like, one of the first questions I asked coming to Linktree was, what's our revenue per headcount? And that just wasn't something that somebody could answer straight away. Whereas, any agency in the world, you go there and the first question you ask is, what's your revenue per headcount? And it's like it's a question they have an answer to straight away. So like that for me was surprising, and there's a whole heap of downsides with having that forefront, but I think there's also upsides that product companies could learn from. Question from Uj. Sorry if I'm mispronouncing your name. Who should go out work in an agency? On what point in one's career is it optimal to work in an agency? So we discussed this a little bit earlier. I think there's definitely a personal preference angle to this. I'm going to talk purely salary for a moment, and this is going to have an Australian kind of focus to it. I think early in your career, you get paid more at a product company. Middle of your career, I think it depends. Later in your career, you get paid more at an agency or a consultancy. That's what I've observed. Me working in agency and consultancies as a director, I was paid a lot more than what I was paid working at a product company. That's kind of what I've observed. Phil, how about you?
Yeah, I think it probably depends on like, I think a salary is a really good example. I think it depends on what type of agency you work at, because the ones that I worked at and the ones that I've interviewed with, they can't pay anywhere near the amount that the product companies were. But that's where consultancy, I think, is that sort of like an agency life, but at a completely different salary. So I wouldn't necessarily agree that later in your career you get more at an agency. I think it's more as a consultant, you'd certainly get paid a lot better. And maybe it's a consultancy agency. So if yeah, and I think that's where the distinction that we're talking about earlier is important. From a salary perspective, I think as just a straight engineer, product is going to pay more. However, to say at what point in career, I think if you want that breadth and you want that understanding, start out in an agency and start out like go for like the startup agencies, because like you're gonna get that experience, you're gonna get that knowledge, which means then sure you get paid less, one because it's an agency, and two because it's more of that startup. But once you complete sort of 3-4 years, the knowledge that you get out of that you can then take into a product space, and you'll get paid a hell of a lot better, but also you'll know exactly sort of like how not to do things and how to do things quickly, which is one of the things that I do start to see with developers who start out at an agency. If you're like a junior or an associate and you start out at a product space, you're going to be slower. You're not going to know all of the bad ways of doing things, so you don't know why you necessarily do it the right way. At an agency, you're going to know fairly quickly, and so I think, like, by all means, start out in an agency and then move into product space, because you'll become a lot faster at what you do. And that's my opinion. It means then, like, going back to that work-life balance. That work-life balance in a product space is a lot nicer.
Yeah.
And so as you mature and you have external commitments, being able to go, well, I clock off at 5 and I don't have to think about it for the next day. Whereas agency, I feel like you don't have that option. Yeah, it's a lot nicer.
Yeah, I think the only caveat I'll add to that is you've got to be self-directed in your learning to take advantage of that in an agency. If you're somebody who is able to support their own learning and investigate and spend time, researching and trialing and erroring and focus on that 100%. If you're somebody who to learn needs structure, then I think a product company is probably a better fit for you as a junior. And I think that's probably the line to draw there.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
But
I've actually done a talk about that in the past, and like that's the delineation I had as well. It's like, I mean, you've got the people who are like, I just need tickets, give me tickets to work through product space. That's like you work to a spec,
yeah.
and that's product space. If you're just someone who goes, great, I just want to investigate and figure this out myself, agency is great.
Yeah. Question from Runza: which one has a more friendly working environment or team, if that's necessarily? I like my opinion on this, Phil, is that it's more about the team than a separation between the two. Like I think you can have some really fun teams at an agency and some really crappy teams at a product, and vice versa. Like I think it's more the culture. I think there is some forcing functions that I talked about. There's definitely more forcing functions to have a more hectic environment in an agency than an established product company. But then I think, a startup product company is probably more hectic than an established agency. And so, you can equally find it each way. I don't think there's a strong way one way or the other as general buckets. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think it's depends. It depends on the culture of the place that you work at. I think that forcing aspect is like product companies tend to have a clear understanding of like this is what we want our culture to be. They'll have more of those guidelines. Agencies, at least the ones that I are at, which was startup, like it was more organic and free flowing on like what the culture is. Like, I mean, in the early days when it was like 3 people in an office, we played Mario Kart for like an hour and a half, and like that was after lunch. So we had a lunch break, and then we played Mario Kart. So those sorts of things. It was a really friendly, great, and environment. But we had the opportunity because that's just the culture that was organic. That's what we enjoyed. Whereas, you'd never do that at a product company. But table tennis for some reason is a huge product culture fit. So it comes down to the people that you work with. I've heard of agencies that have got terrible cultures and like they do run their teams into the ground and there's no rewards for them. So I don't think it's a one or the other. I think it's a case of like you pick somewhere that you clearly have a good culture at.
Yeah, and I think those cultures can shift and change as well. Like I think that's important. The culture of the company when you join versus the culture in a year's time versus 2 years time, like that can shift and change as well. And it's that can be an indicator that you're kind of not the right fit for their culture anymore, and that's fine. We're going to do one last question before we wrap up because we're rapidly getting to the top of the hour. So a question from Huge: what skills make a consultant stand out as compared to a product engineer? Do you want to give your thoughts on this first, Phil?
Oh, I mean, as I said, I haven't been a consultant, so I can't speak to too much. But I think the main difference would be probably your stakeholder management skills. Like as a consultant, you need to understand how to work with stakeholders. You need to understand sort of how to drive the a decision one way or the other. Whereas as a product engineer, there can be stakeholder management, but like you don't need to have, like there's enough people around you. Like you'll have BAs and Scrum Masters and all sorts of people to assist in that stakeholder management. As a consultant, it's expected that you will be doing that stakeholder management. So I think that's probably from my opinion, that's what will make a huge difference of like, what will make you stand out. Can you direct people, tell them, hey, that's a terrible idea, you should do it this way instead? And being that having solutions to problems rather than just highlighting problems. I think that would be another area that makes a consultant stand out.
I 100% agree. The way that I used to describe it, so I used to teach engineering managers at my agencies to hire people, and the way I would describe it to them is if you had two candidates in front of you, one of which was a 5 out of 10 in communication and an 8 out of 10 in tech, versus a 5 out of 10 in tech and an 8 out of 10 in communication, I would choose the 8 out of 10 in communication every single time. Because the thing that's going to make the project successful for the client and therefore successful for the company, the agency, is not how good a engineer you are, but how well you work with the client, how well you understand them, how well you can gather information from them and work out exactly what you need to do and push back effectively and respectfully and deal with those relationships. Like, that is going to make the project more successful than being the best engineer, the 10x engineer in the world. And this is especially true when you're working in small team agency. A lot of the teams that I will put together for clients will be maybe two engineers. I think the biggest project we had 4 engineers on that project. And so you need at least 2 people in that project to speak to clients. And if you've only got 2 people in the project, 2 engineers in the project, there's got to be both of them. But even if you've got four engineers on a project, you still need 50% of them to be able to communicate. Okay, we've reached the top of the hour. Thank you, Phil, for joining me. This has been a great discussion. Sorry for those of you whose questions we didn't get to. Hopefully we can spend some time talking about this in the YouTube comments and the LinkedIn comments afterwards. As always, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, you can scan that middle QR code. I do these live streams pretty regularly. I normally do them monthly. I'm taking a break in September because I'm doing a lot of traveling. So there won't be a live stream for another couple of months, but I normally do them monthly. If you subscribe to my newsletter or follow me on LinkedIn, YouTube, etc., then you'll be able to get notified when the next live stream is. I also do a 20-minute catch up with people. If you just want to have a chat about anything technology, leadership related, or technology career related, please feel free to just book 20 minutes in with me, and we can have a chat. More than happy to do that. Anything you want to say to the fine folks before we finish, Phil?
No, thanks for having me on. No, it's always fun talking about agencies and products. I enjoy this space.
It is. It's so personal, but there's definitely kind of on the standard distributions. There's definitely different means on the standard distributions. Perfect. Thank you very much, Phil. Thank you everybody for watching, and see you next time on Tech Leaders Launchpad live streams. Goodbye, everybody.